The moment she walked into that dimly lit lounge, my lungs seized up like an engine running on empty. I had come for a blind date, expecting a stranger, someone who wouldn't mind the sawdust on my boots or the fact that my life revolves around a 4-year-old's bedtime story. Instead, I was staring at the one woman who could burn my entire life to the ground. N. Blair, my best friend's ex-wife. My name's James Williams. I'm 26, and I run a construction crew out in the Rockies. My life is a loud, bruising blur of steel and heavy lifting during the day, but at night, it's hauntingly quiet. I live in a house filled with the ghosts of marriage that ended in a hospital room, leaving me as a single father to my daughter, Agatha. My routine is my armor. Wake up at 4 a.m., prep Agatha's lunch, hit the job site, and come home to a cold kitchen. I'd spent 2 years building a wall around my heart to protect my daughter from more loss. But as I sat down in that vibrant red dress, looking like a heartbeat in a graveyard, the wall didn't just crack, it shattered. I knew dating her was a betrayal of my best friend and a risk to my family's peace. But when she looked at me and whispered, "James, don't walk away," I realized the quiet life I'd been living was no longer enough. I was tired of just surviving. I wanted to feel alive, even if it meant starting a war. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. To understand how I ended up in that chair, staring at the woman who used to be off limits, you have to understand the mess I've been living in. For the last 2 years, my life was a series of check boxes. Wake up, feed Agatha, work 12 hours, bathe Agatha, sleep, repeat. I was a man who worked with his hands, building houses for other people while my own internal home felt like it was crumbling. I didn't have time for feelings. I didn't have time for women. Most of all, I didn't have time for the drama that usually came with living in a place like Boulder. It was Emma who started all this. Emma was a new girl at the construction office, a bundle of high energy and blonde hair, who thought everyone needed to be as happy as she was. She spent 3 weeks pestering me about a friend she had. She told me I was too young to be a monk. She said Agatha needed a woman's influence. Usually, I'd just ignore her. But that Tuesday, the silence in my house had felt particularly heavy. I agreed to the date just to make her stop talking. I told her it would be 1 drink, 1 hour, and then I was going back to my daughter and my solitude. Emma told me to meet her friend at a place called the Gilded Rose. It was a fancy spot, the kind of place where people wore shoes that cost more than my truck. I felt out of place the moment I walked in. I was wearing a clean flannel and my best jeans, but I still felt like a guy who belonged on a scaffolding, not sitting on velvet chairs. I was sitting at a corner table, checking my watch every 30 seconds, when the door opened. When Blair walked in, the world slowed down. In our town, it was a name that carried weight. She was smart, she was sharp, and she had once been the wife of John Cole. John was my best friend since college. We had played sports together, worked together, and shared everything. When they got divorced a year ago, I did what a good friend does. I took John's side. I didn't ask questions. I didn't call in. I just assumed she was a villain in his story, because that's what John told me. But the woman walking toward me didn't look like a villain. She looked exhausted. She looked like she was carrying the same kind of heavy grief I carried every morning. She was wearing a red dress that was modest but striking, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look professional yet vulnerable. When she reached the table, she stopped. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, I thought she was going to turn around and run. "James," she whispered. And I replied, my voice sounding like gravel. We sat there for a long time just looking at each other. It was the ultimate trick. Emma, the girl from my office, wasn't just some random matchmaker. I realized then that Emma was actually Ann's younger sister. She had been working at my company under a different name, watching me, learning about my life, and then setting this up. She knew exactly who she was putting together. She knew that I was a lonely widower and that her sister was a woman who'd been crushed by a marriage to a man like John. The first 10 minutes were painful. We talked about the weather. We talked about my construction projects. We talked about the library where she worked. We both avoided the name John like it was a curse word. But eventually, the tension became too much. I told her I should go. I told her that John was my brother and that this was a mistake. I told her that if Sarah, my late wife's sister, found out I was here with her, there would be hell to pay. Sarah was already on edge, always watching how I raised Agatha, always judging me for not mourning correctly. But then, and reached across the table. She didn't grab my hand, but she got close enough that I could feel the warmth. She told me something that changed everything. She told me that her marriage to John hadn't been the perfect picture he painted. She told me she had spent years shrinking herself, making herself small so he could feel big. She told me she had seen me over the years, at the backyard BBQs and the college reunions, and she had always thought I was the only person in that circle who actually saw her as a human being. I asked Emma to do this, she confessed. I was stunned. You knew it was me? She nodded. She explained that she didn't want a stranger. She wanted someone who knew the truth of where she came from, but had the strength to look past it. She told me that she had watched me after my wife died. She had seen me at the park with Agatha from a distance, and she saw a man who was building a life out of nothing but love and grit. Then she said the words that sealed my fate. James, everyone wants us to be who they think we are. John wants me to be the bitter ex your sister-in-law wants you to be the mourning widower. But who are we when they aren't looking? I think we're two people who are tired of being lonely. Please, just keep dating me. Let's see if we can build something that belongs only to us. My mind was screaming at me to say no. I thought about John's temper. I thought about Sarah's judgmental eyes. I thought about the man code. But then I thought about my cold apartment. I thought about the way Ann looked at me, not as a single dad or a construction worker, but as James. One more date, I said, but we have to be careful. She smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, the gray in my world started to fade. We stayed at that lounge until they closed. We talked about real things, about the fear of failing our children, about the weight of being the one who stays behind when someone else leaves. It was the easiest conversation I'd had in a decade. But as I drove home that night, the reality began to sink in. I pulled into my driveway and saw the light on in the living room. Sarah was there, babysitting Agatha. Sarah was a woman who lived for her late sister's memory. She kept my wife's photos everywhere and constantly reminded me of the standard I had to live up to. When I walked through the door, Sarah was waiting. She asked me how the date went. She was smiling, but it was a sharp smile. She wanted to find a nice, quiet girl who would be a replacement mother for Agatha, someone Sarah could control. I lied. I told her the date was a bust. I told her we didn't click. I felt like a coward, but I wasn't ready for the war yet. I went into Agatha's room and watched her sleep. She looked so much like her mother that it usually made my heart ache. But tonight, for the first time, I didn't just see the past. I saw a future where maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be alone. I didn't know that John was already calling my phone. I didn't know that Sarah had already started looking through my things. I didn't know that the secret of my date with and was already leaking out. I just sat there in the dark, thinking about a red dress and a woman who asked me to keep going. I was a builder by trade. I knew that before you can build something new, you often have to tear down the old foundation. I just didn't realize how much of my life was about to be demolished. The first chapter of my new life had begun, and it was written in the ink of betrayal I was finally willing to commit. I was going to see and Blair again, even if it meant I had to lose everything else to do it. After that night at the lounge, the air in my house felt different. It didn't feel like a museum for my late wife anymore. It felt like a place where a secret was growing. Sarah, my sister-in-law, had left after her babysitting shift, but her presence always lingered. She was the kind of person who straightened the photo frames of her sister every time she walked by, as if to remind me that I was still a grieving husband first and a human being second. The next few days were a blur of sawdust and silence. I was out on a job site in North Boulder, framing a house that looked out over the Flatirons. Usually I loved the work. I liked the way a structure came together, piece by piece, until it was strong enough to stand on its own. But my mind wasn't on the wooden beams. It was on Anne. I kept thinking about the way she looked in that red dress and the way she talked about shrinking. I realized that I had been shrinking, too. I had been making myself small to fit into the box that Sarah and John had built for me. I was James, the good dad, and James, the loyal friend. I wasn't allowed to be anything else. On Thursday, my phone buzzed in my pocket while I was on a break. It was a text from N. There's a small park near the library. It's quiet. Would you want to bring Agatha there on Saturday? We can pretend it's a coincidence. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a risky move. Saturday was usually the day Sarah came over to take Agatha to the zoo or the mall. But the thought of seeing her in the daylight, was too strong to ignore. I texted back a simple yes. Saturday morning came with a biting cold wind. I dressed Agatha in her thickest pink coat and her little boots. She was excited. She loved the park. As I strapped her into her car seat, I felt a wave of guilt. I felt like I was using my daughter as a shield for my secret, but I pushed the feeling down. I needed this. When we arrived at the park, the grass was still frosted with white. I saw Anne sitting on a bench near the swings. She wasn't wearing the red dress today. She had on a thick wool sweater and jeans, looking like a normal person, yet she still stood out to me. She was reading a book, but I could tell she wasn't really focused on the pages. Agatha ran straight for slides. I sat down on the bench next to Anne, keeping a careful distance just in case someone we knew was watching. She's beautiful, James, and said softly, watching Agatha. She has your eyes. She has her mother's smile. I said, it was the truth, but for once, saying it didn't make me want to cry. It just felt like a fact. We talked for an hour while Agatha played, and told me more about her life with John. She explained how he had controlled the finances, how he made her feel like she couldn't survive without him. She told me that toward the end, she felt like a ghost in her own home. I listened, feeling a growing anger toward my best friend. I had known John was arrogant, but I never knew he was cruel. But then the peace was shattered. My phone started ringing. The caller ID showed John's name. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked at Anne, and she saw the look on my face. She knew. Don't answer it, she whispered. I didn't. I let it go to voicemail. But 10 seconds later, it rang again, and then again. On the fourth time, I realized I couldn't hide forever. I stepped away from the bench and picked up. Hey, John, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. James. John's voice was like a whip. He wasn't happy. Where are you? I'm at the park with Agatha. Why? What's up? Don't lie to me, man. John snapped. I just got a call from a guy on your crew. He saw your truck parked near the library park, and he saw you sitting on a bench with my ex-wife. My blood turned to ice. I looked around the park, searching for a familiar face, but saw no one. The construction world in Boulder was small. Everyone knew everyone. John, listen. No, you listen. John interrupted. He was shouting now. That woman ruined my life. She took half of everything I owned and walked out. And now my best friend is sitting in a park with her? Tell me it's a mistake, James. Tell me you're there for some other reason. I looked over at Anne. She was standing up now, her face pale. She knew the conversation was going south. I looked at Agatha, who was laughing as she went down the slide, completely unaware that her father's world was about to explode. It's not a mistake, John, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I had. We met for a date. It was a setup, but we decided to keep talking. The silence on the other end of the line was terrifying. When John spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. "You've made a huge mistake, James. You think she's a saint? You think she's some victim? You have no idea who you're dealing with. And you've just thrown away 10 years of friendship for a woman who will leave you the second things get hard." He hung up. I stood there staring at the phone. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet, and walked over to me, her hand trembling as she touched my arm. "He's going to tell Sarah," she said. She was right. If John knew, Sarah would know within the hour. John and Sarah had become close after the divorce. They shared a common bond in their bitterness. Sarah would see this as the ultimate betrayal of her sister's memory. "I have to get Agatha home," I said, my voice shaking. "I have to get ahead of this before Sarah shows up at my door." "James, I'm so sorry," and said, "I didn't want it to happen like this." "It was going to happen eventually," I replied. I looked her in the eyes. "I don't regret it, and I just need to protect my daughter." I grabbed Agatha, who complained about leaving so soon, and rushed to the truck. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My mind was racing. I thought about the twist Emma had told me, that she was Anne's sister. I realized that this was a war that had been brewing for a long time, and I was right in the center of it. When I pulled into my driveway, my heart dropped. Sarah's car was already there. She was sitting on the front porch, her arms crossed, her face a mask of pure rage. I got Agatha out of the car and walked toward the house. I tried to act normal for the sake of the kid. "Hey, Sarah, you're early." Sarah didn't even look at Agatha. She looked straight at me. "John called me, James. He told me everything." "Sarah, let's go inside." Not in front of Agatha. I pleaded. "No," Sarah hissed, standing up. "I want the neighbors to hear. I want everyone to know what kind of man you are. My sister hasn't even been gone 2 years, and you're dating that woman? The one who cheated on your best friend." "She didn't cheat, Sarah. You know John lies." I shouted back, finally losing my cool. Sarah stepped off the porch. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't care about John. I care about my sister. You were supposed to honor her. Instead, you're bringing a stranger around her daughter? You're a liar, James. You've been seeing her for a long time, haven't you? That's why you were so busy all those weekends. You were with her while my sister was in the ground. That's a lie, and you know it." "Is it?" Sarah asked, her voice turning cold and sharp. "Because I'm going to make sure the judge knows. I'm going to file for custody, James. I won't let my niece be raised by a man who has no respect for the dead." She turned and walked to her car, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with a crying child in my arms. The foundation of my life hadn't just cracked. It had completely shattered. I was alone, facing a custody battle and the loss of my best friend, all for a woman I barely knew, but felt I had known forever. I went inside and locked the door. I sat on the floor of the kitchen and held Agatha tight. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Check your front door. There's something you need to see before John gets to it." I walked to the door and opened it. There, sitting on the mat, was a thick yellow envelope with no return address. I opened it and felt my heart stop. It was a stack of bank statements and photos, not of me and but of John. There were photos of John meeting with Sarah in secret months ago, and there were bank records showing John had been moving money out of his accounts and into a fund in Sarah's name. The shocking twist was starting to reveal itself. My best friend and my sister-in-law weren't just angry, they were partners. And I was the only thing standing in the way of whatever they had planned for my daughter and my future. I picked up the phone and called the only person I could trust. "And," I said, "I need your help. It's worse than we thought. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong." My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay hidden. Now let's continue. I sat on my kitchen floor with the yellow envelope spread out like a blueprint for a disaster. Agatha was finally asleep, exhausted from the crying and the shouting. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet I used to have. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits. The papers in front of me were terrifying. I am a construction foreman. I know how to read numbers, and these numbers didn't make sense. There were bank statements from a year ago, right when John and Ann were finishing their divorce. They showed thousands of dollars moving from John's business account into a private savings account. But the name on that savings account wasn't John's. It was Sarah's. My best friend and my sister-in-law had been moving money behind everyone's back. My phone buzzed. It was Ann. I told her come over, even though it was late and even though it was dangerous. I needed someone to look at this with me. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red and she was shaking. I showed her the papers and stared at the bank statements, her breath catching in her throat. "James, this is the money from our house sale," she whispered. "John told the judge the money was gone. He said he lost it in bad investments. I walked away with almost nothing because I believed him. And look at the dates, and," I said, pointing to a line on the paper, "he moved $50,000 to Sarah the same week my wife passed away." The shocking twist was becoming a nightmare. John hadn't just been a bad husband, he was a thief. And Sarah? My late wife's sister, the woman who claimed to be the protector of our family's honor, was taking hush money from him. Why would Sarah take money from John? And asked, sitting at the table and rubbing her temples. "I think I know," I said, my voice low. "Sarah always hated that my wife chose me. She thought I was just a dirty construction worker who wasn't good enough. She wanted Agatha from the day she was born. I think John paid her to help him ruin your reputation during the divorce, and now they're using each other to get what they want. John gets to keep his stolen money, and Sarah gets to take Agatha away from me." We sat in silence for a moment, realizing the size of the mountain we had climbed. They weren't just angry that we were dating. They were terrified that if we stayed together, we would start talking. And if we talked, we would find the truth. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on my front door. It wasn't a knock, it was a kick. "James, open this door." John's voice boomed through the wood. He sounded drunk and full of rage. I looked at Ann. I told her go into the back bedroom with Agatha and lock the door. I didn't want my daughter waking up to a fist fight. Once she was safe, I walked to the door and swung it open. John stood there, his face flushed red. He tried to push his way inside, but I'm 6'2", and I spend my days lifting steel. I didn't move an inch. "You got a lot of nerve, James." John spat. "I saw her car out front. You really think you can just take my life and keep it? You think you can sleep with my ex-wife in the house where your own wife died?" "Get off my porch, John," I said, my voice steady. "You're drunk and you're talking trash. I know about the money. I know about Sarah." John froze. The anger in his eyes shifted into something else for a split second. Fear. But he covered it up fast with a loud, fake laugh. "The money? You don't know anything. You're a grunt who pours concrete for a living. You can't prove a thing. I have the statements, John. I have the photos of you and Sarah at the diner on Arapahoe. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops and showing them everything." John stepped back, his hands shaking. "You think you're so smart? Sarah already filed the paperwork. Social services will be here Monday morning to check on Agatha. By the time I'm done with you, everyone in this town will think you're a monster who was cheating on a dying woman. You'll lose your job. You'll lose your kid. Is she worth that, James?" He pointed toward the bedroom where Ann was hiding. "She's worth more than a friend who steals from his wife and betrays his brother," I replied. John cursed at me one last time before stumbling back to his truck and peeling out of the driveway. I slammed the door and locked it, my heart racing. I went to the back room and was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a sleeping Agatha. "He's gone," I said, But he's right about one thing. They are coming for Agatha on Monday. And looked up at me. James, there's one more thing you haven't seen. It was at the bottom of that envelope. She handed me a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a handwritten note. My heart stopped because I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my late wife's. To whoever finds this, the note started. I know I don't have much time. I found out what John was doing. I saw the transfers to my sister. I asked her about it, and she told me it was a safety net for Agatha because she didn't think James could handle being a father alone. I'm scared. I don't want Sarah to have control. If something happens to me, James needs someone strong by his side. Someone who knows what John is capable of. I hope he finds, and again. She was always the only one who saw the truth. I fell back against the wall, tears finally stinging my eyes. My wife hadn't been blind. She had seen the betrayal coming from her own sister and my best friend long before she died. She had tried to protect us even as she was leaving us. She wanted this. I whispered. She wanted us to find each other. She was trying to warn us and said, her voice thick with emotion, Sarah isn't just trying to be a good aunt. She thinks the money John gave her belongs to Agatha, and she wants to use it to buy a life she never had. We spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table. But we weren't just mourning anymore. We were planning. We realized that Emma and sister must have been the one to find the letter and the bank statements. She had been working at my office, waiting for the right moment to trick us into that date so we could finally team up. The shocking twist was that we weren't the ones being tricked. John and Sarah were. They thought they had buried their secrets with my wife. But the truth was coming up for air. We have 48 hours until Monday, I said, looking at the mountain peaks outside the window as the sun began to peek over the horizon. We need a lawyer, and we need to find Emma. If she has the original documents, we can stop the custody hearing before it even starts. I'll call her, and said, but James, John is desperate. He's going to try something at the job site. He knows that's where you're most vulnerable. I nodded. I knew my crew. I knew the men I worked with. But I also knew John had deep pockets. I looked at Agatha, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that her father was about to walk into the fight of his life. I wasn't just a construction worker anymore. I was a man building a fortress. Let him come, I said. I've spent my whole life building things to last. It's time I show him what happens when you try to tear down a father's house. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of cold slate. I stood in my kitchen, wearing my best suit, the one I had bought for my wife's funeral, and hoped I'd never have to wear again. Beside me stood Anne. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. She held the yellow envelope like a shield. In the next room, I could hear Emma and sister playing a quiet game with Agatha. Emma had finally come clean. Over coffee at 5 a.m., she told us how she had found the letter and the bank records while cleaning out an old desk John had discarded. She knew that if she just handed them to me, I might not believe her. She needed me to see the real and first away from John's lies. The blind date wasn't just a trick. It was a rescue mission. It's time, Anne said, her voice steady. The hearing was held in a small, wood-paneled room at the Boulder County Courthouse. It wasn't a big trial with a jury. It was a private meeting with a judge to decide where Agatha would spend the next few months. When we walked in, Sarah and John were already there. Sarah looked like she was mourning. She wore all black and held a handkerchief, looking every bit the grieving aunt who just wanted to protect her niece. John sat next to her, looking smug. He had a high-priced lawyer with him, a man in a sharp gray suit who looked at me like I was something he had stepped in on a job site. The judge, a woman with gray hair and glasses, looked over her files. Mr. Williams, she began, the petition filed by Sarah Miller claims that your home environment has become unstable. It suggests that you've been involved in a long-term clandestine relationship that predates your wife's passing, and that your choice of partner the ex-wife of your best friend, is causing emotional distress to the child." Sarah let out a small, fake sob. John nodded solemnly. My lawyer, a woman, and had helped me find over the weekend, stood up. "Your Honor, we have evidence that this petition is not based on the welfare of the child, but on a financial conspiracy to defraud my client and Ms. Blair." John's lawyer laughed. "Financial conspiracy? This is a custody hearing, not a spy novel." "Then let's look at the facts," my lawyer said. She laid the bank statements on the judge's desk. She showed the transfers from John to Sarah. The room went dead silent. The judge's eyes moved quickly across the pages. She looked at the dates, the weeks leading up to my wife's death. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, her voice turning cold, "why were you transferring $50,000 to your best friend's sister-in-law during his wife's final days?" John stammered. It was a loan. Sarah was struggling with the medical bills for her sister. "I never saw a dime of that money." I spoke up, my voice echoing in the small room. "My wife's bills were paid by our insurance and my overtime hours." Sarah never helped. She bought a new car 2 months after the funeral. Then we delivered the final blow. My lawyer handed over the letter from my wife. "This was found in Agatha's baby book," my lawyer explained. "It is a sworn statement from the deceased, expressing her fear of her sister's motives and her knowledge of Mr. Cole's theft. Most importantly, she gives her blessing to the relationship between Mr. Williams and Ms. Blair." The judge read the letter in silence. Sarah's face turned from a pale white to a deep, angry red. She looked at John, waiting for him to say something, but John was staring at the floor. He knew the game was up. The hush money he had paid Sarah was now the evidence that would ruin them both. "This hearing is over," the judge said, slamming her gavel down so hard it made Sarah jump. "Not only am I dismissing this petition, but I am also ordering a full forensic audit of Mr. Cole's business and a police investigation into the source of Ms. Miller's recent funds. Mr. Williams, you are a fit father. I suggest you take your daughter home." We walked out of that courtroom into the bright Colorado sun. Sarah tried to scream at me in the hallway, calling me a traitor, but a bailiff stepped in her way. John didn't even look at me. He walked straight to the elevators, probably already calling a criminal lawyer. As we reached the parking lot, the weight that had been on my chest for 2 years finally lifted. I felt like I could breathe the mountain air for the first time. "It's over," and said, leaning against my truck. She looked like she had just finished a marathon. "No," I said, reaching out and taking her hand. This time, I didn't care who saw us. "It's just starting." We went back to my house. Emma was in the front yard, helping Agatha chase a butterfly. When Agatha saw me, she ran as fast as her little legs could carry her and jumped into my arms. I held her tight, knowing that no one was ever going to take her away from me again. That evening, we didn't eat ramen or eggs. I fired up the grill and cooked a real meal, and stayed for dinner. We sat on the back porch as the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the peaks purple and orange. "I have to ask," I said, looking at him, "do you really want to keep doing this? After all the drama? After the court and the threats?" And looked at Agatha, who was sitting on the grass playing with a toy truck. Then she looked back at me. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her fingers interlocking with mine. "James," she said softly, "before that blind date, I was just surviving. I was a ghost. You and Agatha, you made me feel like a person again. I don't care about the war. I only care about the peace we found in the middle of it." I looked at the house behind us. It was an old house, and it still had some ghosts, but it was starting to feel like a home again. I realized that my life didn't have to be a loud blur of work and a quiet night of loneliness. It could be something more. It could be a partnership. The next day, I went back to the job site. The guys on the crew didn't say much. Construction guys usually don't, but they nodded at me with respect. They knew I had stood my ground. My life was still loud during the day and quiet at night, but the quiet was different now. It was a quiet of a house that was full of hope instead of shadows. John Cole was eventually charged with fraud. Sarah disappeared from our lives, moving to another state to avoid the scandal. I never spoke to them again, and I didn't need to. My life wasn't about fixing the past anymore. It was about building the future. Every Sunday, and comes over, we take Agatha to that park near the library, the one where the secret first came out. We don't hide anymore. We sit on the bench, hold hands, and watch our daughter play. I was a man who spent his life building houses out of wood and stone. But with him by my side, I finally learned how to build something that would actually last. I got tricked into a date, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. This story teaches us that true integrity is built on choosing what is right for your family over the pressure of toxic loyalty. James's journey shows that while people may use your grief or your past to control you, like Sarah and John did, standing your ground and seeking the truth can dismantle even the most complex lies. Ultimately, the lesson is that a foundation of honesty and a partner who truly sees you are more important than maintaining a peace built on secrets. Building a new life often requires the courage to tear down the old, broken one. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?